Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Jerusalem psychotherapist. For this week's Torah and Psychology post with Parshas Vaeira, we're going to discuss briefly an important concept that's vital for understanding how to navigate life in a way. It sounds like a very broad, far-reaching statement to make, but if we look at the simplicity of the message, we can see how to adapt it and see how it can actually have an impact on our life. What I'm talking about is the contradictions in life. Life is full of contradictions. The way that we conduct ourselves in our life is not always consistent. It could be in the way that we act, the way that we think, the way that we perceive the world, the way that we interact with people, the way that we view ourselves. There are so many different avenues, so many different areas in our life where we can experience contradictions. Sometimes these contradictions are obvious, and we try to consult with people, we try to consider it for ourselves, how to resolve these contradictions. But, as the Beis Halevi points out, the fact that there are so many contradictions in life, it's not always possible to resolve these contradictions. Otherwise we would do it. Unfortunately, people can live these contradictions and actually be oblivious, in a sense, to the fact that the way that they act is not consistent with the way that they think, or vice versa. There's cognitive dissonance, which can explain this. But sometimes we go through our lives experiencing this tension without actually realizing that there is an inconsistency and there is a contradiction here that perhaps can be resolved. And this is what the Beis Halevi discusses as a thesis of how we need to try to open up and be more aware to these contradictions in life. However, it's important, if we look at this week's parsha, to understand that not every inconsistency or not every contradiction can be resolved. If we look at the makos, we look at the makkah of barad, it's vital to actually look at the meaning, what Rashi says about barad, that we have this fire and water together, this hail and fire that came down on Mitzrayim. As Rashi points out, that fire and water don't go together. It's a contradiction. It's an elementary contradiction. And therefore, the fact that they were able to create peace, as Rashi says, they were able to create peace between them in order to produce and express this makkah of barad, is a nace within a nace. It's a nace in itself, that there was this shalom between the two elements of fire and water. And if we take this and we can understand this based on dialectical behavior therapy, based on DBT, which looks at the contradictions in life, which looks at the fact that in life we might be pulled in two different directions at the same time. And not always is it necessarily a contradiction that can be resolved. Sometimes actually the work that needs to be done is accepting the contradiction. It's accepting the dialectical reality of our life. That there is Eish and there is Mayim, that there is fire and water. And the peace between them is the moment where you're actually able to understand that you can hold these two factors together at the same time. DBT teaches a person to recognize and understand that there's a contradictory experience the person is going through. Whether it's two different decisions, whether it's where they act and think, it's not always the tension of cognitive dissonance that needs to be resolved and understood, but perhaps it's also just understanding that one can accept and hold these two contradictions at the same time, and that's what causes and brings about the peace, the relaxation, the ability to stabilize, to understand that you can be okay with these two different desires or two different directions that you're experiencing in you could say an internal way, an emotional tension that you're experiencing. The calm and the stability comes from accepting this reality, this dialectical reality, and then you can move on. It has a power to it in itself. The power of the fire and water coming together to make peace created this makkah, created the power of this makkah of barad. And so too in our life, if we're able to learn there are situations where we have to accept and acknowledge the contradictions in our life, to accept that we have two different, in a sense, forces pulling us in different directions, that we can feel one thing and feel another thing at the same time, perhaps love and hate, for example, at the same time. perhaps excitement and tension at the same time. What DBT on this message of Rashi is saying about making peace between two contradictions is a direction in our life to give us this ability to hold the contradictions, sometimes just to hold these contradictions at the same time, accept the reality, and there is a force and power to that in itself. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.